Hello there. Okay, so we are going to go through how to install Siebel using the containers which are made available from My Oracle Support, also known as ARU. Now, I have an environment which is reasonably well set up, so I'm not going to need to perform any of these prerequisite tasks. But let's just take a quick look at the environment that I'll be using. So here I am at the terminal. I'm just in the root directory at the moment. You can see I've got some content here already related to Siebel, but I'm going to create a fresh directory for us to work in as we work through this process. So let's make a directory called Siebel from ARU. Okay, so this is a clean folder for us to begin to work in. Now, the first thing we need to do is to get the containers from ARU. Now, I've downloaded those in the background, so I'm going to find those and move those into position. Okay, so let's copy those in. From a shared folder. This is VirtualBox, as you can see. Okay, so this is the 20.6 version of the containers, but it would be the same process in each case. Let's make a directory called ARU and push those in there. Okay, let's unzip these to get started. Okay, so that's going to pull the files out of the zip archives. Okay, so here we've still got our zips and we've got our unzipped files, which are our tar.gz files. So the tar.gz files, it tells us this is what we should end up with. So 20.x, in this case for me, it's going to be 20.6. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is to load these into Docker. We use the docker load command, docker load, and then pull in the information from the tar.gz file. Okay, so let's just have a look at the state of Docker on here. We're running Docker version 18.09. As you can see, I've got no Docker containers running and I have no images that are here at all. Okay, so let's import these. just set this up here and see what's going on as we take these steps. So if I have a look at the state of Docker images, you can see as I import these, we're actually adding to the list of Docker images. Get our sample database as well. Okay, so we've got the Siebel images from ARU installed and running. Well, not running. Now that's a key misunderstanding that some people have had. So this is just listing the containers that are on the system. We're not actually running any of these containers yet. All we've done is really copy these applications into place, but the applications aren't running. If we do a docker ps, we can see that there's nothing actually running yet. So that's really our next stage. Okay, so we're also going to need to get an Oracle database. Now, the Oracle database container, we're not going to pull this from ARU. We need to get this from hub.docker.com. So you need to go there and accept the agreement, etc. I think I've got most of that done here already, but let's take a look. So, well, let's first of all pull up Firefox. We'll go to hub.docker.com. That's not going to work for me because I'm still connected to VPN here, having downloaded from ARU. Okay, so let's look for Oracle. We're after the Oracle database. Yes, now you can proceed to check out and sign in here, but I've already got a user name and password for this system, so I'm just going to log in here. Okay, so I've gone in, accepted all of those. Let's just close that for the moment. So we are first going to need to pull this. So it's store Oracle database enterprise. Let's copy that and we'll pull that if we can. Okay, access denied, so we'll need to do a Docker login here. And now we should be able to pull this down. This is a reasonable sized file, so it's going to take a little while to get that done. Let's take a look at where we'll be going from here. So we've imported the containers, and we need to create some folders ready to store the state of our containers. So let's do that. Okay, so we created our Siebel from ARU. Got our ARU content there. I'm going to make a directory now called, let's call this PV for persistent volumes. We'll go into the PV folder, and I'm going to make a directory for each of the containers that we're going to run. We're going to be running a database, so I'm going to need an Oracle persistent volume to store the database inside. And then we're going to be running our individual containers for Siebel. Now I could make a separate folder for those because I might want to run more than one enterprise. So let's say I'm going to start with an enterprise folder called ENT. And then in here we'll make a folder for the SES container, for the SAI container, for CGW container, and we're also going to make a directory for the Siebel file system. Now note at the moment the way the permissions are set on these. So demo admin as a user is going to have read-write access, and demo admin as a group is going to have read-write access into this folder, but nobody else will. So as long as we're running as the demo admin user, they will be able to gain access to these folders. The same applies for the Oracle folder. So demo admin, or whatever the user ID for demo admin is, will be able to access these, but nobody else will. Now we'll probably end up coming back here if we have some problems with access as we go along. Okay, now you can see that the Docker container for the database is finished. So we now have all of the containers that we need in order to start Siebel. And we created our persistence layers. Yes, now access rights will be important. We'll need to think about that if we have problems with access. That's not mentioned here. Okay, so let's move on. We're going to now get some scripts from GitHub. Okay, now it says to make a directory here called Siebel, but of course we can put these things wherever we want. So I'm going to make a directory. We've got our persistent volumes, we've got our stuff that we downloaded from ARU, and now we've got gonna have some scripts. Okay, so let's make a directory called scripts, and in here we're going to do a git clone. Try Control C there. Okay. Okay, so we've now got a configuring Siebel folder. Right, so the next thing to do is to actually launch our containers. Okay. As appropriate, copy this to a new name and make appropriate changes to the parameters in the file. So we need to actually look at this file and change it appropriately, or copy it. Now whichever we do, let's first of all see where we are. That's saying we're going to need to go into this folder. Got a bit confused there. Automate architecture, launch. Okay, so what do we have to start? We have a file called ent1.sh. Okay, so let's copy this to start with, so that we actually have the original, and we'll call this my architecture. Let's edit this. Okay, so the first thing we've got here is, where are these scripts? So it currently thinks that they're in home demo admin, but that's not actually the case. So let's just adjust that so that it points into these, into this folder. Okay, so I'm actually currently, the path to configuring Siebel is there. Okay, let's just make sure that that actually works. And goes somewhere sensible. It does. No complaints there. Okay, and the persistent volume is set to var-lib docker volumes pv. Well, that's not correct either, because I've actually put them here in pv. Docker volumes pv. Okay, so I need this folder name for my persistent volumes. Now, the next one is all about the fact that the information on GitHub really allows us to build our own containers. And when we go through the process there on GitHub, we'll end up with containers that are named registry.local.com:5000/Siebel. But our containers don't look like that, so we need to adjust this too. So let's have a look here. Docker images. So my path is not registry local com:5000 to Siebel. It's actually just store Oracle and then I'm at Siebel. So we're going to need this bit here. Okay, now domain company.com talks a little bit about the certificate that will be in the container. Now, by default, our containers have company.com. You would need to generate your own, or for star.company.com, I should say, the SSL certificates. I think they also work for star.oracle.com. But if you want to use something different here, you'd have to generate new certificates, and ideally you'd use a small Docker file to put those made certificates into our containers. We're not going to cover that here, but we might cover that in a separate video later on. Okay, now our enterprise folder is really what this is asking. I think I just called it ENT. Yeah, I did. I just called it ENT, not ENT1. DB host is Oracle 12c. Now, by default, when our scripts start the containers, it's going to give a name to the database container of Oracle 12c. And at that point, DB host of Oracle 12c will be able to connect to that machine name. If you happen to have a database that's already on your machine or hosted elsewhere on your network, then you can put the host name here for accessing your database. But ours are going to be named like this because it's all set up to make it as simple as possible. We can also change here if we happen to know that we have different usernames and passwords for accessing. The sample database that we supply comes seeded with sadmin and welcome1, so that's why this is all in here, and guest CST and welcome1. If you're accessing your own database, you'd need to modify these so that the enterprise was configured correctly. The run as user here talks about which user our containers are going to masquerade as for the purpose of accessing the file system. So 9999 may not be what we want. If you look at these folders that I've created, they're owned by demo admin. So I really want the user ID of demo admin. So let's make a query here into /etc passwd, and we'll look for demo admin. Okay, so the demo admin user is actually 1,000 on this machine, or the user that I'm logged in as. So I'm going to change this to 1,000. Okay, now I'm not going to cover anything else that's in here at the moment, but suffice to say that this part will be important later on when it comes to configuring Siebel. And we'll come back to this file a little bit later on when we need it. Okay, so my architecture is now set up and is pointing to the relevant places and user IDs for this system. Okay, so now we're going to, in fact, I think we're going to do one more check here first. I know, let's just try and operate against the command. So bash.all version parameter file. That's our next command. Okay, so start all, I want to start 20.6. They're the containers that I have, and I want to use my architecture. Okay, so the first thing that's happening here is it's starting the Oracle database, and it was expecting this to come from store Oracle database, so it's therefore starting up this container. If we actually look now in the background at what's happening as the containers are started, we should be able to see each of our containers come up. Now, as we start this container, the first thing that the container will do, we've got a problem. First thing that container will do, will try and unpack its contents. And what's happening there was it was waiting until this container became healthy. It hasn't actually become healthy, it's failed. And the most likely reason for this is going to be its ability to access the folder for storing its persistent volumes. Okay, so we can see it failed a short while ago. If we have a look at any log files, cannot open for reading or writing, so it's unable to get into this directory that it needs to get into. So what I'm going to do is one of a number of things that I could do. Here we are in the PV folder, and here's the Oracle folder. I'm going to rename this. Sorry, I'm not going to rename it. I'm going to change the permissions here. So I'm going to give global write access to the Oracle folder. Now the alternative is that I could, with a bit of knowledge of how our system works, I could actually use an appropriate username here, but I'm just going to set this to global write access initially, so that our container will be able to write to that folder. And I'm just going to have a look here at the command that we executed to make sure it really is pointing to the appropriate location. That's all the log content. Okay, so this tried to go to home demo admin Siebel from AI PV Oracle. So that was correct. It was therefore almost certainly a write problem. Write access problem. Okay, so this old container is still sitting here in the background. We're going to remove that. And we're going to try again from our start all command. You can see this is going to say health starting here, and we're effectively waiting here for it to say healthy. So every few seconds here it's executing a query to Docker to find out whether or not this container is healthy. Now the length of time that this takes will depend a little bit on the amount of processors that you have, the power of the processors, the amount of available RAM. Let's just talk about this for a minute, as customers have found problems with this. So on this machine I've actually got 9.6 gigabytes. You can see at the bottom that's now gone healthy, and it's starting the Siebel application interface container now. But on this machine I've got 9.6 gigabytes of RAM, and I've got a fair few processors running here. I've got 8 processors assigned to this machine. The key thing really is the RAM, I think. To start a database and the Siebel system, we'll need at least 8 to 16 gigabytes. Okay, so everything's beginning to come up now. We've got a database server running. We've got the Siebel application interface is now up and running and healthy. The gateway is coming up. And finally, the Siebel Enterprise server is coming up. Now, with Siebel, ever since IP 2017, to have a tier initialized is really to just have that tier in light mode. So this is not a fully functioning Siebel gateway or a fully functioning Siebel Enterprise server. What this is a system which is waiting for configuration. So in each one of these containers, an instance of Tomcat is running and is waiting for input. Now we should be able to get to the application interfaces Tomcat server, and you can see here that I've pointed port 443, or the standard HTTPS port, to port 4430 on the container itself. So I'm going to come to HTTPS localhost, which is 443, and that should begin to warn me about potential issues with the security certificate, because this is not a fully paid for certificate, it's a self-signed get started quickly certificate. So I know all about this and how it's generated. That's got me through to Tomcat, and I should therefore now be able to get to the Siebel Management Console. Now, as I said, this hasn't been configured in any way at this stage, so I would go in with the default username and password of sadmin, lowercase admin. That's the way that we've done the install in these pre-supplied containers. These credentials, of course, change the moment we actually begin to configure it, either for database access or SSO access, but in this case, by default, it's sadmin. So once I'm connected, I'm through to this stage where I need to configure the Siebel setup. And there are several processes here, of course: setting up the gateway, bootstrapping the gateway, setting up profiles and deploying those profiles to servers. That can take quite a while. And so as a result, we've also helped to automate this system. But one of the first things that happens is that we attempt to connect to the database. Now, though you can see that our database is running, our database doesn't yet have our Siebel database installed and ready to go. So that's our next step, is to actually put the database into place. In fact, we can also see here 32770 is the port that's been mapped to 5500. So I should be able to get to the Enterprise Manager. What happened there? Just do it. Yeah, I can see it down the bottom there. So I'm going to grab that port number, and we'll also set up a connection to there. And no point in me doing that, I need to put on the end EM. Let's go into the Enterprise Manager. Okay, now then, again, this database is the containerized database. If I want to know how to get into here, I can either go back to Docker Hub and get the information there, or I can just type it in because I happen to know it. So it's sys, and the password is ORADOC, Oradoc. I'm going to have forgotten. I think it's Oradoc DB1. And if it's not, then we are going to go back to hub.docker.com and pull it out. Oradoc_DB1. Okay, so only one PDB here at the moment. It's just the default PDB. So let's now get our database installed, our sample database. To do that, we'll need the name of the container which has the database in it. And I'm going to go from here into DB. We have a script here available called dropdb. Remember, these were all populated when we pulled the information from GitHub. Okay, so the DB file location. So DB files on this system are not stored in varlib Docker volumes. For Oracle, see, this directory has now been populated as the database came up. This is actually where our Oracle database is persisted. The DB path, well, that's the DB path for our database, well, for the database we're using, which is a containerized database. If you're going to use this tool to push into your own databases, then you'll need something different here, depending upon where inside Oracle's file structure you've decided to store the database. But that's correct for the container. And then you can see the connection parameters here. Okay, so everything's finished there. We're now going to run this script. I'm going to pass in the name of our database container. That's connecting into the database, and it's beginning to drop files off into the file structure. So if we actually go into UO2 here, you can see this sample folder being created. We've just run into a problem here. No space left on device. Not had that one before, but that'll be to do with the amount of space in the home directory. We've got a big problem there that we now need to deal with, because that database won't have initialized correctly, and as a result it hasn't attempted to connect it in. That was not what I was expecting, but we're just going to have to work around that. So I'm 100% usage on my home folder, which only has 30 gigabytes available. Okay. I think as a result of that, I'm going to move them into varlib Docker, where I might normally keep them. Unless I can find a bit of space. I think the database is about 8 or so gigabytes, or 5 to 8 gigabytes, and of course I've got this ARU content still here. Actually, let's make a little bit of free space that way. So yeah, here in ARU we've got 7 gigabytes sitting here just with this information. So let's just remove all of that. Okay, so now if I do df-h, we should see that we've got quite a bit more space available now. we've got 7 gigs available. I think that's probably going to be enough. So let's just clear down what it failed to put into here. cd ... and so you can see here that the Oracle database has been using a user 54321. I could have therefore changed the ownership and the group ownership of the Oracle folder to 54321, but by giving global access, I've also made a way for it to get in. Okay, so let's remove this sample folder. So we're up to 11 gig. I'm hoping that that'll be enough for us to get started. So let's go back now to our drop folder. Okay, let's try again. Yeah, that looks a little bit healthier this time. So it's now plugging that database in, and there we go, it's finished. If we go back now to Enterprise Manager and refresh this page, we should see that we've now got the sample database in here. There we go, the sample database is ready for us now. So yes, at this stage we could go back to the Siebel Management Console and go through the numerous steps of setting this up, but I'm going to go for the automated process that we've made available. So we've got a script called configure, and it's going to take input from my architecture. Have another look at what we've got in here, just so we're clear on what will get used here. The key thing here really is that it's going to use this information to set up the authentication target as a database using this database. It's going to set the Siebel server to use this database, and it's going to configure a Siebel Enterprise server to run these 3 component groups. You could change the list of component groups here, so you know, you could add on workflow, for example, if you wanted to start that one instead. And as I mentioned, if you wanted to run multiple enterprises, you could just simply change the name here, ENT, and have multiple, My Architecture 1, My Architecture 2, or you could have one called Call Center Architecture, one called Workflow Architecture, depending, or Finance Architecture, depending upon which industry vertical you're working with. Okay, so let's run this script then to configure my architecture. Okay, so this is now going through and configuring the management console for us automatically. So we don't need this process here. In fact, if I come out of here, we've already got through the step that will let us log in with sadmin. That's no longer valid. this has now been switched to database credentials. So I need to go in with sadmin and welcome1. Okay, and we can see now that the enterprise is being configured. So there's already some information that's been set up. An enterprise profile has been created. Here it is, and that's, you know, the authentication has been set up as mentioned to go through to the Siebel DB TNS string, which has been configured to talk to the database as configured in the my architecture file. So that's now completed, and it's now completing, it's now configuring, or deploying I should say, a Siebel Enterprise server. So in the background we can see that this is now going to wait for a while the Siebel Enterprise server deploys. But the Enterprise was successful. Now this takes a little bit of time. Again, this will depend upon your machine. We can see we're also potentially running out of space again here. Hope that's not going to be a problem for us. Okay, that error probably came up earlier. We've still got 1.9 gigabytes, which is more than enough for the persistent volume. And the persistent volume here is going to store everything that we're accustomed to looking at with Siebel. The files that we really need to get hold of. So if we go into the enterprise folder and go into SES, here we should have our Siebel server enterprise directory, and we've got our log folder here, currently empty because we're still in the process of deployment. But as the system starts up, this will begin to be populated with typical log files. You can see it's named the Siebel Enterprise server ses-ent.company.com. So the .company.com, that is the domain name which needs to match up with the SSL certificate. And again, these are seeded in the containers that you download from My Oracle support, and so these scripts will make it relatively easy to get everything started. Okay, now then, there was an error there. I just caught sight of it. Unrecognized field. This was during well, let's see what's happened here. It has actually come up, but the application interface hasn't come up. Okay, I suspect that this is due to a slight change since the files were uploaded to GitHub. Not marked as ignorable. I think this changed possibly in 20.3, possibly 19.7. Need to make a slight change here and not add this in. Just trying to figure out exactly which step this was. This was the deployment of SAI. So it's just this final step really. Yeah, actually, it was in the step where it tried to create the SAI profile. It couldn't create the SAI profile with the information that we got from GitHub due to this missing field. It then failed to deploy that profile because that profile didn't exist. So we need to just fix up this profile. Well, what we could do is just deploy it from here. Actually, it's not even going to exist here again because it couldn't create it. So a little bit lost here. We could either create an application profile, or we could try and fix this up and run this script again from part way through. The ideal would have been to fix this up before downloading it, or before running. So the problem here is in the SMC automation, and it's in the create SAI profile. So min connections is no longer a valid item here. I'm just going to delete it. And then I kind of need a little custom script here to just do part of the work of configure. So we're just going to do this on the fly. I copy configure to configure partial. Let's just delete most of these steps. And that's it. We only want these final few steps here. So I'm going to configure partial my architecture. Before I do that, let's just take a look at where we are, and we'll just remove this. And then we'll try this again. Okay. Looks like that's done what we needed it to do. So that's now created as our Siebel application interface. Of course, that Siebel application interface profile is what gives us access to call center and tools. Now really we should have some log files by now. So we can see all of the object managers which have started here. Far too many, essentially. It could be that they are still coming up, although because of that little pause that I've had and had to try and figure out what to do, it looks like everything might be up by now. So let's just try and actually connect to call center. Well, this looks positive. Once we've got the login page, we're pretty much there. So there's call center up and running. Of course I can get to contacts, all contacts, and I'm looking at the content in the sample database. So here's a fully running version of Siebel as of 20.6. Of course we've got Siebel Web Tools over here too, which is just booting up. From a Docker PS perspective then, nothing much has changed here since the moment at which we got the containers running. They're all up and running and look healthy. And there we are, we're ready to begin configuration and our playtesting with Siebel 20.6. Okay, so I hope that's helped to resolve some of the problems that you might be running into. I think the typical gotchas are going to be the amount of memory you've got, which will, if you don't have enough, this thing will be really, really slow as it tries to use swap space. Access to the appropriate folders and the appropriate folder permissions for the containers to get in. Yeah, an appropriate file space availability. I ran out of file space there on /home, but it wasn't too hard to make a bit of extra space. Okay, anyway, I hope this helps, and thanks for watching.